Sister Rosemary Ferguson, formerly known as Sister Laurence Edward, and please unravel the mystery of how someone born in Spalding, Nebraska, ended up in the cornfields of Adrian, Michigan. Mystery.
That's true. Well, my father had a farm in Nebraska, and he and his two brothers had farms in Leo Valley, right outside of Spalding, which was 600 people. And so that's how I came into the world, in the bedroom that the other 9 were born in. And so they tell me the story of Anne being sent out to the fields to tell Dad that there was another one born, but I don't know, I never heard whether he came in or not. You see it tonight, you know.
He probably thought, oh, another mouth to feed.
Yeah.
Was he a successful farmer?
Well, he was up until the 1936, and that was the time of the terrible drought. And so he had 2 brothers, and my 2 uncles had farms there. They lost them all at the same time because of it was a terrible time in our history. And so then we went to Omaha, we moved to Omaha. And people were leaving quite readily because they had lost their farms. And it was a tremendous kind of earth problem at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Earth problem at that time, you know, the Dust Bowl and down in the lower estates. Mm-hmm. We didn't have that. We had the drought, but we did not have the Dust Bowl that the people in the lower states had to go through. That was horrendous. Not long ago, I picked up the book of The Grapes of Wrath because I wanted to make sure that I had read it or just heard about it. So I reread it, and I don't know how those people survived that, but we did not have that.
So I presume you were the youngest of the siblings.
I was the last.
Yes.
Because my mother died when I was 2.
Oh.
And she had serious kidney problems, so she died when I was 2. So my sisters took me over, and they were wonderful. And they were 13 and 15 at the time, Margaret and Anne. And Loretta was oldest of the family. So
she probably did the cooking.
They were wonderful. They were just absolutely, until the day they died, they were just superb women and generous and guiding in their time. So I've been blessed beyond all blessing.
Yeah. Well, what was your life like on the farm?
Well, I was very alone on the farm, and I think most farm kids are, because my brothers next to me in age, they were 10 and 12 years older, and they have nothing to do with me. And I remember my cousin and I were out riding horses one day, and we galloped them across the fields. And those boys found out, and they were so angry. But my dad was there when we got home, and he quieted them down and sent them on their way. And we probably, were doing what we shouldn't have done. But so I remember playing alone, and didn't mind it, because you knew no different, And
Your Irish father probably had his eyes on his youngest daughter. Did he have you have a special connection with him?
Well, he was funny, and he would say things like this, He would be sitting with who I thought the other old men, but he was probably mid-50s. And he'd say, "Oh, I'd sell her for a bag of candy." Well, I just thought that was wonderful.
Sell you for a bag.
Yeah, I'd sell her for a bag of candy, But,
What did your brothers and sisters call you? Rose or?
They called me Abby, because there was a song out, Abby's Irish Rose. So till they died, those 3 older boys called me Abby. Larry and Ed didn't, but the 3 older ones did.
But your sisters never did, I presume.
No, they didn't. They didn't, but the others did. Yeah.
So, had you started school when you were in Spalding before you moved to Omaha?
Indeed. I went to school in school district number 16 in Leo Valley, Nebraska, in which I was the only kid in my class. All those first 5 years. I went to 5th grade in that school.
So you're the only first grader, second grader, third
Exactly.
grader in a
I
class.
I do not remember being taught. I think I just kind of picked up by osmosis what was going on in the classroom, because I don't remember really a class where I was being taught. Now, I'm sure that must have happened, but I don't remember that. I always blame that onto the fact that I couldn't get AAAs all the time in school. And then we moved to Omaha, and that was my first experience with this in a Catholic school. And it was the Sisters of Mercy. And I loved them. And what I loved the most was our sister, she was probably very young, would sail up and down the aisles. And they had a long, soft black veil, and that would whip out behind her. And I always liked to look at that. It was wonderful.
Well, before you moved to Omaha, it must have been a sad moment when your family had to sell the farm. What was that like for you?
I remember it very well. I remember the day we had the sale. It was on January 10th, and it was winter. And I remember being so sad that day, and I can't believe what I was so sad over. It was that my little red wagon was being sold. Now, I was 10 years old. I shouldn't have been so attached to a little red wagon, but it was a symbol, I suppose, for me of all that was lost. The close family, and then the family restating itself in another milieu, totally new and unused to it.
Was your father able to find work there in Omaha?
He was a night watchman.
Oh, great.
But we were only there a short time when he became very ill. He died of serious cancer of the bone. He died a very painful death. And my sister Margaret took care of him. And they could only, when I think of the beauty of hospice here, our sisters have hospice, and it's such a beautiful ministry. And where the sister can get a pain medicine whenever she needs it. But then they could only give it every 4 hours. And it wasn't enough to quell serious bone cancer.
Well, that was quite an experience for the 9 of you.
Mm-hmm.
Not only your mother's death, but your father's
Yes,
death.
yeah.
Who took over as the leader of the gang?
Bill was the male leader, and Margaret was the female leader. And when Dad was dying, there was a cot in his room, in his bedroom, and I would get the Irish songbook and sing all the Irish songs to him, because I knew them, because Loretta was a beautiful pianist, and that was really our recreation on the farm, sing-alongs, And the other thing I remember is on Friday nights, the girls would come home from teaching, because my 3 sisters were teachers.
But they didn't live at home?
No, because the custom was that they would live with the family, because they might be teaching 30, 40 miles away. And so they would live the week with the family in which their school district was. And so I lived with my brothers and Dad. And so on Friday nights, we'd have maybe sing-alongs or something. But also, books were being read. We'd all sit around the kitchen, which was the biggest room in the house. And one of the girls would read a book, a novel. And I would sit there like I knew what was going on, but just to be with them, just to be there. Wherever they were, I was,
That's probably where your love of reading began?
Perhaps. Yeah.
Now the mystery. You're still in Nebraska. How do you get to the Midwest?
When my father died, Margaret and I lived with my 5 brothers in Omaha. And when my father died, Margaret taught first grade at St. John's too while we were there. My brother Bill said, you are to take Abby, you and Ann, and go to Chicago and live with Loretta. My oldest sister was married and had moved to Chicago. He said, you do not need to stay with us and become a Margaret Lacey. Now, a Margaret Lacey was the name of a real person, but it was that system in the Irish family. If the mother died, the oldest girl became the mother, and therefore didn't marry and just stayed that way. And so Bill said, you are not to become a Margaret Lacey. So off we took. We left at midnight.
On the train, I suppose.
On a train to Chicago, and I cried all the way. I was very lonesome for my brothers, very lonesome for them. And I went back then in the summers and to visit.
Well, you were lucky to have that.
I was very lucky,
Yes.
you know, yeah. So that was how it was.
So did you attend an Adrian Dominican school then?
No,
in
my
Chicago?
first 2 years, I finished out a grade school at the Mercy Sisters in Chicago, but went my first 2 years to Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati, Ohio, our neighbors.
Yes.
And my sophomore teacher said to me, you know, we have a prep school, and she explained what it was. Would you like to come to that? So what did I know? So I went home and I asked Margaret. And Margaret said just like this, oh no. She said, you must finish high school with us. But if you want to enter after high school, that's fine. Now, wasn't that brilliant?
Brilliant.
She might have been 28 or 30 at that time, and she was a young woman. She was just brilliant. And so then we moved to the south side of Chicago.
You and Margaret and
Ann into St. Philip Neri Parish. Thanks be to God.
The rest is history.
Because I went to Aquinas. So that's how I found our sisters. Thanks be to God.
Yes. Who was the principal at that time?
Sister Mary Kevin. And she was a very smart woman. When I became 16, I worked at Carson Peary's in the summertime, and I earned my tuition.
Which was what?
$90 a year, but if you paid it all at one time, you got a 10% discount. So I paid it all the time. Now, Margaret never asked me to do that. That was just, we were all helping this family, I think, to survive, truly. And so I was just part of the helping to survive. And it didn't even occur to me that I wouldn't do that. So I think Sister Kevin picked up on that. And in a senior year, Mother Genevieve was my homeroom teacher.
Mother Genevieve
Mother
Weber.
Genevieve Weber was my homeroom teacher.
That is very interesting.
And she and Sister Corinne took me down to Jameson's, the famous Jameson's in Chicago, and bought the nightgowns without any lace and all that. And so...
well, who suggested that you enter the Adrian Dominicans?
No one suggested it to me. I just said that to Sister Genevieve one day. No one said, you know, I think you'd make a great Dominican. Nobody said
Not
a
even
word
the prep
to me.
school.
I was not picked out as. But anyway, in May 23rd, now graduation was in June. Sister Kevin said, I'm going into Adrian to see Mother Gerald. Would you like to come in and enter then? And I said, sure, whatever. I mean, it didn't occur to me that I was missing a high school graduation. That wasn't, what was wrong with me that I wasn't thinking that, you know? But anyway, so we left on the train.
No problem with Margaret?
No.
Your sister?
No, she came with me.
Oh.
Margaret and I went with Sister Kevin to Chicago. And we were supposed to get in at 6, but we got in at 10. It was the war time, and the train was filled with young guys on the war, and so it was delayed. But so when we got there, Sister Bridgetta was waiting for us, but we were to sleep over in Archangelis, so we went through this dark
tunnel.
all the way over there. So that was lonesome. I was very lonesome that night and wondering if this was all right. Margaret afterward told me how lonesome she was as well. So
Did you meet Mother Gerald the
the
next day?
the next day, the next day, and I was happy. I was extremely lonely, but I was afraid to tell Sister Bridgetta because I thought that she would say that was a sign I didn't belong.
She was the postulant director.
Yeah, yes, and so, but I overcame that past because I liked everything. I liked the getting up. I liked the prayers. Whatever we did was different. It was fine. Once I got over the loneliness. You know.
Did anyone else from Aquinas enter when you did?
Oh, 7 of us, and we all stayed. That's why I'm saying. There's a picture over in the historical library.
Yes, I remember.
Sister, Rita Schultz, Dorothy Folliard, Alice Hitzman.
Oh my!
They're
Is that Jean?
Jean Walter.
Jean Walter. Oh my!
And they were all smarter than I was. They were all brilliant and exceptionally brilliant. And also, there was a secretary entered, Mary Feeney. She had been a secretary at Aquinas for 10 years. But that's my mantra, and we all stayed, even through the renewal.
Yes, and there are several of you still on Holy Mother Earth.
Dorothy and Rita and myself, and Mary O'Hanlon is in California.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
Who through your years as a professed sister has been or became an inspiration or a mentor to
Sister
you?
Mary Philip Ryan, my novice director. I loved that. Didn't know I liked her so well, but I loved her. I think she gave me a tremendous love for Mother Gerald and Mother Camilla Madden because she talked about them, you know. And then Mother Gerald, when she came over, we'd sing Irish songs, so that was like a home. And but Sister Mary Phillips, her strength and her giftedness and her love for the community, the love for the church, the love for the Dominican order. I can't say the Dominican order so much, but the Adrian community. I mean, she didn't go outside. I mean,
Well, I think we didn't at that
no,
time.
I mean, but it was this community and what Mother Gerald and Mother Camilla Madden and Mother Augustine did in it, you know. She just praised those women constantly. So I have a great love for those women. I just love the thoughts of them.
Did you ever get to Ireland to honor the places
did.
where we
I
came
did.
from?
I did, and I went to Mother, not
Camilla.
Augustine, but Mother Camilla's hometown. I stayed in I was visiting there for 2 weeks, and I took the bus from Dublin. And so I went down to the hotel. It's a little town. I went down to the woman in the hotel in the morning and said, I would like to hire a taxi for the morning. She looked at me. So she got this fellow. Well, you know, you could go around Mother's hometown in quite a short amount of time. So by this time, he's taking me around Barnes, but to keep this morning going, you know, and that
Wasn't it unusual to even have a taxi cab?
It was, but I didn't know that. I just thought sure they'd have a taxi cab. But it's a very small town, and even some of the buildings were still the very short buildings that were built. But it was amazing to me that woman came out of that little tiny town and became the exquisite leader that she did. It was just, I just could, all the time I was there, I thought, and she left this little town, and she did what she did. It was just that calling, that sense of vocation to me. And so I had a lot of time left over till the bus went going back to Dublin. So I just went and sat. There was a town square. I just sat in it because I just thought if I could just keep breathing in, you know, something of who she was, because she's just a tremendous woman.
Did you visit any of the places where she, like, she certainly was an educator. Where did that come from?
Good question. Well, I think education was very strong with Mother Camilla and Mother Gerald, because the English took the education away from the Irish. You know, they couldn't have schools. They couldn't have any. So they had what they called hedge schools. Hedge. Behind a hedge. And a master would come and gather some of these kids and teach them to read, teach them the language. And so when we look back at our own history, we see that tremendous emphasis that Mother Gerald and Mother Camilla Madden had on education. You know, and when the Bishop of Detroit didn't like us as well as liked my good friend Margaret Brennan's community, then Mother Camilla went to Chicago, and so that started the array of education schools we were in, because that was their big thing, education, major in their minds.
Well, wasn't Mother Camilla the transition from the hospital, the clinic we had here in Adrian,
absolutely,
to educate?
And when you read our history, it's very interesting to me, because she kind of edged out the hospital. You know, there were some old timers left in Madden Hall when she built the first 2 stories of Madden Hall. There was still a couple of the old guys there, old guys in quotes, and she kind of edged it. She kept them there because they didn't have any place to go. But after that, then the first thing she built was that high school, the school,
the North School,
the school.
Yeah.
And that began it. How she had the nerve to build that chapel and order those magnificent windows from Germany. I cannot imagine the faith she had to do that, and the insight and the blessing. Such an extraordinary woman, and didn't live long. She did not live.
She died in office?
She did. Yeah. And then Mother Gerald took over. Took over, and then took over, and then took over.
3 times? Well,
Yes.
you took over twice.
Yeah, that's right. But you notice they quit that at that time. They made an absolute after that. Enough of that already.
What was your first mission?
My first mission was Rosarian Academy.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did Mother Gerald give that to you personally?
And she stood at the side door as I was going out, and I don't know how come that happened, but there were 2 or 3 of us going. And she said, well, she looked at me and she says, well, what lucky star were you born under? I can remember that. And then she came to Rosarian. I think it's another reason I love her so much and admire her so much. Because she would come every winter for a couple of weeks because the apostolic delegate took his 6 weeks vacation at Rosarian. So she would be there for a couple of weeks, and we'd go to the beach at night. See, we would go to the beach at night, and she loved the water.
Well, did you wear the
No,
full habit?
no, we had the, if you remember the era of the long house coats.
Yes. Oh, what
Gorgeous,
a sight. What a
gorgeous, sexy things. And we would get into our long house coats and a scarf around our heads and get into the we had one station wagon in the back of the building where we thought the girls didn't see us. Well, the girls were all looking out their dorm windows. And we would have our supper there. And then we'd have night prayer there too, on the beach. And she would give this wonderful meditation. She could always do it. And it's like Jesus walking on the waters. Every time we come to those Gospels, I think of her. And beautiful meditations. So I thought there was no one in the world like her. But see, I had Mary Philip priming that well.
Yes.
So I thought it too. I took it in hook, line, and sinker and just loved her.
No wonder Mother Gerald said you were born under a lucky star. Rosemary, you were a superior at a very young age.
That was Mother Gerald. I was, when I went, yes, I was 28 when I went to St. Killian's. And, but Dorothy Folliard had been a superior 2 years at St. Edmund's. And another sister from my crowd was a superior at Good Counsel. So Mother Gerald that was not anything unusual.
Do you remember any of the sisters that lived with you at that time?
I remember every one of them.
Oh, my.
I remember them. They were wonderful, and they put up with me.
Excuse me.
Because they had Sister Eileen Marie Ryan before I came, who was absolutely loved and was a wonderful superior and a wonderful principal. We had 1,300 students. Now, I had 30 little girls at Rosarian. The sister came and said, there's the crossing guards are in the parlor to see you. I said, what's a crossing guard? I was out at Rosarian where we had no big streets.
Well, Rosemary, how old were you when you were elected prioress then?
I was 42. And Jean Burns was 3 years younger than I was, and Mary McCarthy was still younger than that. Mm-hmm. And Dorothy Folliard was 2 years older, and Noreen was in her 50s. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She was probably the wisdom woman at that time.
She was absolutely the wisdom woman, and strong, could take in the changes that I'm sure were hard for her to take as well. But she and all of us were of one heart and one mind in saying, we will follow these chapter enactments. We will follow these enactments. Mm-hmm. Very difficult. It was a very difficult time. I will not say that was an easy time, because it was not. So many people were shocked with the changes, and they were shocking.
Yes.
They were shocking. I asked someone just the other day if before they went into Adrian, had they ever heard the word self-determination, meaning finding your own position.
Yes.
We never heard the word during the preparatory time. So those type of changes were critically important.
Were you able to share your joys and scars with Margaret Brennan, who was president of the IHMs across the river?
Oh, Margaret Brennan was wonderful, because they had their chapter renewal 2 years before. But in addition to her being so wonderful and with more experience, she was a magnificent theologian. And the great blessing of all was her sense of humor. Mm-hmm. So I learned from her, and she was a great consideration.
Did you ever have any secret meetings?
Well, we met a lot, because I was on the LCWR at that time, and she was as well. So we had quite a few meetings. We had several meetings.
I remember hearing that she invited you to New York one
We had a small group, and there were the Franciscan men from New York were in it, and they were also part of the major superiors of men, and were going through the same kind of renewal, and it was prior to the St. Louis meeting, where what was born was now the Sisters of the very conservative group of Major Superiors was born at that meeting in St. Louis. But I think they were so concerned about, because we were talking about people in apartments and small, and sisters searching out their own jobs and the changes.
And in regular clothes.
And the irregularities of that. And there were many, of course, because we were all young and inexperienced.
Rosemary, I think I speak for so many of our sisters and former members to thank you and your council for guiding us through those years and making certain that we were educated and that we read the documents of Vatican II.
Of Vatican II.
And the theologians that you brought to us during the summertime.
Yes.
So
That's
enriching.
Sister Carmelia. She was from the college, and she was responsible for that.
What words of wisdom would you have for our newly elected prioress, who, by the way, was one of your novices?
Of course. I am so thrilled with living here. Just the way that Sister Attract and her group introduced the new council, Pat Seaman and her group. It was the most beautiful day of my whole year. And to understand, to make that holy transference. And I have not one worry in the world about religious life or our community. I know that we're doing exactly what God wills for us, because that's what it has. We were to be in education when people needed education, and now we're on another track. And one person or no persons, that is not the issue. It's what we can do with our lives. Our enactments, I think, they're both poetry and they are theology, and they are a way of life for us. And I think those of us over here in Maria, and who are retired any place in the
Dominican
congregation,
Lives Center.
we have to be out on those streets with those sisters who are there. We have to be where they are in our hearts and prayers and our thinking, being mindful of them. I think that's why I love the homilies we have that keep reminding us of what's going on out there, so that we don't become
Insular.
closed. Yes. I have loved every minute of my life, and I have no idea why I am so fortunate to have been an Adrian Dominican.
Yes.
An Adrian Dominican.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to have your presence to have blessed our earth for 90 years. So I thank you for that.
Yes, 90. And it can end.
Yes.
It can end. I have no desire to keep on going. Someone said to me, I think the new group is going to bury me, said that nun. I said, me too. So I'm going to talk with Sister Pat Seaman. I hope she'll be home for my burial.
Well, Sister Donna Markham thought that, and Sister Attract
That's
Kelly
true.
thought that. So chances are Pat will miss that too. Thank you so much for your time today,
Thank you.
Rosemary.
Thank you for doing this.
Yes.
I was scared to death to do this, but I'm very happy to do it.